The silence in my apartment was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floor beneath my restless feet. I'd been pacing for hours, staring at the unopened bills scattered across the coffee table. Rent was due in less than a week, and I had $87 in my bank account. The math didn't add up, no matter how many ways I tried to twist it. Desperation clawed at my throat. Then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my landlord, Mr. Harrington. "We need to talk about the rent. Call me." My stomach churned. I'd always found Mr. Harrington a little off. He was polite enough, sure, but there was something in the way he looked at me during our brief interactions, like he was sizing me up, judging. I ignored the text, hoping I could somehow scrape the money together before he followed up, but he didn't wait. The next day, as I was coming back from a failed job interview, there he was, waiting outside my door. His crisp suit and slicked-back silver hair gave him the air of someone used to getting what he wanted. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "May I have a word?" I nodded, clutching my bag tightly. "Of course." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his presence overwhelming in the small space. He gestured to the bills on the table and raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure you know why I'm here." I felt my face flush. "I'm working on it," I said quickly. "I just need a little more time." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Time is a luxury, Miss Carter, and I'm afraid I can't afford to extend it indefinitely." I opened my mouth to plead, to promise him anything if he'd just give me a little longer. But before I could speak, he held up a hand. "There may be another way," he said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "A way for you to make this problem disappear." My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're a smart woman. I'm sure you can figure it out." The implication hit me like a punch to the gut. I stumbled back, my mind racing. He couldn't be serious. Could he? But the look on his face told me he was. He didn't say another word, just turned and walked out, leaving me standing there, stunned and shaking. For the next 2 days, I couldn't think about anything else. I hated myself for even considering it, but every time I checked my bank account or looked at the eviction notice tacked to my fridge, the desperation grew. By the 3rd day, I made my decision. I called him. My hands were trembling so much I could barely hold the phone. "I'll do it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, and then his voice came through the line, calm and steady. "Good. Come to my office tomorrow evening. We'll discuss the details." The next evening, I stood outside his office door, my heart hammering in my chest. I'd dressed carefully, not wanting to seem too eager but also not wanting to offend him. I knocked, and his voice called me in. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He gestured for me to sit, and I obeyed, feeling like a lamb being led to slaughter. "You're nervous," he said, his tone almost kind. "I understand. This isn't easy for you." I didn't respond, my throat too tight to speak. He stood and walked around the desk, leaning against the edge so he was close to me. "Let's make this simple," he said, his eyes locked on mine. "One night, that's all I'm asking. And in return, your rent is covered for the next 6 months. No questions, no strings." I nodded, unable to look at him. He reached out, tilting my chin up so I had no choice but to meet his gaze. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard. "Yes." What happened next felt like an out-of-body experience. I went through the motions, numb to everything but the sound of my own heartbeat. When it was over, he handed me an envelope with cash, enough to cover not just the rent, but a few other bills as well. I took it without a word, avoiding his eyes as I left. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I told myself it was over, that I'd done what I had to do to survive. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. In the weeks that followed, I tried to move on. But Mr. Harrington didn't make it easy. He started showing up unannounced, dropping hints about our arrangement and suggesting we do it again. Each time I felt the walls closing in a little more. Then, one day, he crossed a line. He showed up at my job, making comments that were just subtle enough to be dismissed as jokes, but laced with enough menace to make my skin crawl. I realized then that he wasn't going to let me go. I decided to confront him, to put an end to whatever this had become. I went to his office, determined to stand my ground. But when I arrived, he wasn't alone. There was another woman there, younger than me, sitting in the same chair I'd sat in that night. Our eyes met, and I saw the fear in hers, the same fear I'd felt. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let him keep doing this. What happened next is a story for another time. But I can tell you this. I found a way out. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without consequences. But I learned something about myself in the process. I learned that survival isn't just about getting through the day. It's about finding the strength to fight back, even when the odds are stacked against you.